Landlords in Washington, D.C. have had enough. They say they've lost over $1 billion in rent due to the negligence of the D.C. Council. Now they're calling for changes to the landlord-tenant laws. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have quite the interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Washington, D.C. So D.C. is one of those places, okay? It's one of those places I advise no one to be a landlord at, okay? It's not worth it. They do not have your best interests in mind, and they have lots of these anti-landlord laws in place, including, but not limited to, super strong eviction protections, rent control, and Tenant to Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives tenants the first right of refusal if you ever want to sell your property. Now, these laws make it so that, simply put, you don't truly own your property. The government owns it, or the tenant owns it, and you get the benefit of making sure that they live for cheap forever. That's pretty much it, okay? And that's why I say don't invest there. You know, take your money elsewhere, especially if we're talking about the small mom and pops. If you're one of the big players who's building brand new buildings, maybe you can still make money, but I don't think so, okay? I think that the writing's on the wall, and they're trying to change the laws there right now, but it's too little too late in my opinion. So, you know, right now they say, hey, we're gonna make it so that it's a little bit easier for landlords to be able to get the money that they are owed from tenants who aren't paying rent, and it's easier to remove those tenants who aren't paying rent. Well, why did they have these laws in place in the first place? Okay, because the tenants have too much power over private property rights of the landlords within the city. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So first, as an investor, do you think investing in Washington, D.C. would be a good idea? Do you think you should buy a rental property there? Or rental properties, you know? Second of all, do you believe that they're going to actually make meaningful change to the landlord-tenant laws in the city that will actually allow landlords to be able to operate their businesses profitably? Put a comment in the comment section down below and let me know what you think. And let's go ahead and see what the article says. This article is coming from WJLA, which is ABC 7 News, and it says, D.C. landlords rally to change Rental Act to tackle eviction crisis and unpaid rent issues. Let's get into it. More than a dozen landlords, some from leasing companies with thousands of rental units, and another, a retiree with 9 apartments for rent in Northeast D.C., gathered on the steps of the Wilson Building on Tuesday afternoon, all in a show of support for what they hope will be meaningful reform to the district's rental housing laws. On Wednesday, the D.C. Council votes for the final time on the Rental Act. If passed in its current form, D.C. landlords agree it will do little to help the city emerge from what they call an eviction crisis. D.C. landlords have lost $1 billion in rent because of the negligence of the D.C. Council, said Dean Hunter, CEO of the Small Multifamily Owners Association. And that's a lot of money, okay? Now, that includes small and large landlords. And you know what? The small ones are the ones who truly struggle when they get hit like this because they don't have, you know, diversity in terms of where their rentals are located, and they don't have other income sources. So, you know, the large players, they oftentimes will own properties not just in DC, but also in the suburbs or in other states or on the other side of the country, you know, to make sure that everything balances out, because all they're looking at is their numbers overall, and they're using, a lot of the times they will use very, very large amounts of money as the down payment for a property and finance a very small portion so that they can still turn a profit, even though their properties are very limited in terms of income because of rent control and other policies. Okay, so I think that when it comes down to it, I don't think that there's going to be meaningful change here. And according to the article, they don't think there's going to be meaningful change either, okay, even with this new law. The original version of the Rental Act, introduced in February by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, calls for the mandatory hearing deadlines to shorten the process of evicting tenants who don't pay rent or commit other lease violations. The Bowser-backed version of the Rental Act also called for mandatory protective orders that would require tenants who are delinquent to pay into a court registry while their eviction cases are pending. Both of those measures were stripped out of the original version of the Rental Act that Bowser introduced. So the original proposal said that, hey, if you decide that you're not going to pay your rent to the landlord, right, while you're fighting the eviction case, you have to, according to this, pay the delinquent rent into a court registry while your case is pending. Now that seems like a no-brainer to me, because simply put, right, yeah, your eviction case, let's say that you weren't going through eviction, you would still have to pay rent, right? So fighting an eviction case shouldn't be a reason for you to be able to allowed to stay there for free. That is a very smart solution. And if the landlord is in the wrong and loses the case, right, well, guess what? You still owe that landlord money. So you should be, or they should be allowed to receive the money that you owe them. Gosh, to me, the whole situation where they think that somehow it is morally justified to allow a person who is fighting an eviction case to live for free for long, indefinite periods of time, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But then they said, they wanted to expedite the hearing process because, as I've reported before in older videos, it is one of the slowest processes in the entire country, okay? They have one of the slowest processes in the entire country. If you have an eviction filed against you, it will be a very, very long time before you are forced to leave, if ever. And you can't operate a business in that kind of environment. So that's why they needed to change that law. But those two provisions, they were stripped out. And let's see what was left in. If those two provisions are not in the Rental Act, the Rental Act will do nothing to alleviate the eviction crisis, Hunter said. Eviction moratoriums during the COVID pandemic were lifted in September of 2021, but an epidemic of unpaid rent continues to plague housing providers, large and small, within the district. Mike Hugh, chairman of CIH Properties, Inc., owns more than 2,000 rental units, predominantly in Wards 7 and 8. We have one flagship, very large property with 58 new residents that came in during 2025, and 33% of them are delinquent on their rents, Hugh told 7 News on Tuesday. So 1/3 of your brand new residents who all have moved into your property within the last year are already not paying rent. So what does this tell the developers, the real estate investors who want to own property, right? It's telling them, run the other way, because if you own a property here, a 30-year tenants are going to screw you over, okay? Good Lord. Those numbers are awful, absolutely awful. And what is the landlord expected to do? You then take those people to eviction court and they let them sit there and live for free for months or years on end. So yeah, awful, absolutely awful. I feel bad for this guy. And yeah, this is a very large landlord, right? But when you're talking about a large landlord, you're not talking about just some single individual. This guy probably has dozens or hundreds of people working for him. Not to mention contractors, not to mention the fact that, hey, the people who are paying rent, who are living in his units, right? They might not be getting the maintenance needed because he's not making enough money. Okay, so the properties could be falling apart due to the fact that you have so many people not paying rent. This is why we need to get paid. We need to keep our properties up for the other tenants. And hey, we deserve to make money because we invested that money into these communities. There's nobody saying, well, you know what? You have to put your hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into this property. You have to do it because you know what? It is your job as a random Joe to provide housing for free to these poor people over here. Nope. There's nothing in the law that says that, right? I can just simply decide to put mine in the stock market or somewhere else. And that's exactly what a lot of landlords are going to do, okay? They're going to, hey, maybe I'll invest over here in the stock market, or maybe I'll invest in a city where they don't treat me like garbage. What do you think, okay? Do you think DC is ever going to make meaningful change? Or do you think that the landlords there are just screwed? Okay, put a comment in the comment section down below.